There are some relationship red flags that are obvious from a mile away, and then there are situations so bizarre that you don't even know you're looking at a red flag until you're already drowning in it. And that's exactly what happened when my pregnant girlfriend told me she wanted to name our son after her dead ex-boyfriend and got upset when I said absolutely not. So, I'm a 31-year-old guy, and I've been with my girlfriend Lisa for 2 years. We found out she was pregnant about 5 months ago, and it wasn't exactly planned, but we were both excited about it and decided to make it work. And we've been preparing for this baby, and honestly, things have been pretty good between us. Lisa had a serious boyfriend before me named Aaron who died in a car accident about 4 years ago, and she's been very open with me about that relationship and how his death affected her, and I've always been supportive and understanding because I can't imagine how hard it must have been to lose someone you loved that way. She's mentioned Aaron occasionally throughout our relationship, usually when something reminds her of him or on the anniversary of his death. And I've never felt threatened by it because obviously the guy is dead and she's chosen to be with me and build a life with me, so I figured her occasional mentions of him were just part of her processing her grief. We found out we're having a boy about a month ago, and we've been throwing around baby names ever since. And I suggested a few names that I liked, and she seemed kind of non-committal about all of them, and then last week we were sitting on the couch looking at baby name websites, and she said she'd been thinking a lot about names, and she really wanted to name our son Aaron. I didn't make the connection immediately, and I said, "Oh, like your ex," just kind of acknowledging that it was the same name, and she said yes, exactly. She wanted to name our baby after Aaron to honor his memory and keep his name alive, and I literally thought she was joking at first. I kind of laughed and said, "That's not actually something you're serious about, right?" And she got this look on her face and said yes, she was completely serious. She'd been thinking about it since we found out we were having a boy, and it felt right to her, and I just stared at her trying to process what she was saying. I told her there was no way I was naming my son after her dead ex-boyfriend. That was completely inappropriate and honestly kind of disturbing. And she got really defensive and said Aaron wasn't just her ex-boyfriend. He was an important person in her life who died tragically, and she wanted to honor him. And I said, "I understand that, but you don't honor a dead ex by naming your baby with your current partner after him." She started crying and said I was being insensitive, and that Aaron's death had been really traumatic for her, and this was her way of processing that trauma and making sure he wasn't forgotten. And I said, "Lisa, there are lots of ways to honor someone's memory that don't involve naming our child after them." And she said this was important to her, and she couldn't understand why I was being so difficult about it. I told her to put herself in my shoes. How would she feel if I wanted to name our daughter after an ex-girlfriend, even if that ex had died? And she said that was different because Aaron was special and our relationship had been cut short by tragedy. And I said that doesn't make it any less weird to name our baby after him. We argued about it for hours, and she kept saying she thought I'd understand because I knew how important Aaron had been to her. And I kept saying that understanding her grief and being supportive of her healing was different from agreeing to name my son after the guy she dated before me, and she accused me of being jealous of a dead person, which felt like a low blow. The argument ended with both of us frustrated and nothing resolved, and over the next few days, Lisa kept bringing it up in different ways, trying to convince me that Aaron was a beautiful name and it would be meaningful for our son to have a name with a story behind it, and I kept shutting it down, saying the story behind it was that he was named after Mommy's dead boyfriend, which was not the kind of story I wanted for my kid. She suggested we could use Aaron as a middle name instead of a first name, like that was some kind of compromise, and I said, "No, Lisa. Not as a first name, not as a middle name, not anywhere in our son's name," and she said I was being unreasonable and controlling about something that was really important to her. I pointed out that naming our baby was a decision that both parents should agree on, and I definitely did not agree on this, and she said fine. Then I could pick the first name and she'd pick the middle name, and she wanted the middle name to be Aaron, and I told her that still wasn't happening. She started crying again and said she felt like I didn't respect her past or understand how much Aaron meant to her, and I said I did respect her past, but our baby's name wasn't the place to memorialize her ex-boyfriend, and she said he wasn't just her ex-boyfriend, he was the love of her life who died, and that phrase, love of her life, hit me like a truck. I asked her to repeat what she just said, and she realized her mistake and tried to backtrack, saying she meant he was the love of her life at that time. Not that he was the love of her life overall, but the damage was done, and now I was sitting there wondering if I was just the guy she settled for after the actual love of her life died. She swore that wasn't what she meant, and that she loved me and wanted to build a life with me, and that's why she was having my baby. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still hung up on Aaron in a way that went beyond normal grief. I asked her point blank if she was over Aaron and if she'd fully moved on, and she said of course she had, but that didn't mean she wanted to forget him or pretend he never existed, and I said nobody's asking you to forget him, but naming our son after him is essentially making our child a living memorial to your ex, which is unfair to both me and the baby. She said I was making this into something it wasn't, and that plenty of people name their kids after people who've passed away, and I said yeah, they name them after grandparents or family friends or people who were important to both parents, not after one parent's ex-lover. Lisa got really upset and said I was being crude by calling Aaron her ex-lover and that I was disrespecting his memory. And I said, Lisa, he was literally your boyfriend, who you had a romantic and presumably sexual relationship with before he died. That's what ex-lover means. And she said I was being deliberately hurtful. We stopped talking about it for a few days because we were both too angry to have a productive conversation. But then Lisa's mom called me and said she'd heard about the name situation and she thought I was being unfair to Lisa. And apparently Lisa had been calling her mom crying about how I wouldn't let her honor Aaron's memory. I told Lisa's mom respectfully that this was between Lisa and me, and I didn't appreciate her getting involved, and she said that Lisa had been through so much trauma with Aaron's death, and this name meant a lot to her. And I should be more understanding and flexible, and I said with all due respect, your daughter wants to name my son after her dead boyfriend, and I don't think that's an appropriate ask. Lisa's mom said that Aaron had been like family to them, and they'd all grieved his loss, and having a baby named Aaron would bring them comfort. And that's when I realized this wasn't just Lisa's idea. Her entire family was on board with this plan. I asked Lisa about it later, and she admitted that she'd talked to her family about the name before discussing it with me, and they'd all thought it was a beautiful idea. And I asked her why she felt the need to get her family's approval before even running it by me, the actual father of the baby, and she said she didn't need their approval. She just wanted to talk through her feelings with people who understood how important Aaron was. I told her that the fact that her family even knew about this plan before I'd agreed to it was a huge problem, because now if we don't name the baby Aaron, her whole family is going to think I'm the bad guy who refused to honor Aaron's memory, and she said that wasn't her intention. And I said, but that's what happened, Lisa. You've essentially created a situation where I'm the villain for not wanting to name my son after your ex. She insisted that wasn't how her family saw it, but then her sister called me a few days later trying to convince me that Aaron was a great name and it would mean so much to Lisa, and I told her sister the same thing I told Lisa's mom, that this was between Lisa and me, and I wasn't going to be pressured into naming my child something I wasn't comfortable with. My own family found out about the situation because I needed to vent to someone, and they were all horrified and said Lisa was being completely inappropriate. My mom said she couldn't imagine asking my dad to name one of us kids after an ex-boyfriend, and she thought Lisa needed therapy if she was this hung up on someone who died 4 years ago. My brother said it sounded like Lisa wasn't actually ready to move on, and maybe having a baby right now wasn't the best idea if she was still this attached to Aaron. And that thought had crossed my mind too, but we were already 5 months into the pregnancy, so it wasn't like we could just hit pause on the whole situation. I suggested to Lisa that maybe we should do couples counseling to work through this issue because clearly we weren't getting anywhere on our own, and she said she didn't think we needed counseling. She thought I just needed to be more open-minded and empathetic, and I said, Lisa, I'm being as empathetic as I can be, but empathy doesn't mean I have to agree to something that makes me fundamentally uncomfortable. She asked me what exactly made me so uncomfortable about the name Aaron, and I tried to explain that every time I'd say my son's name or hear other people say it, I'd be thinking about her ex-boyfriend, and our son would grow up knowing he was named after some guy his mom dated before his dad, and that was a weird dynamic to create. Lisa said I was overthinking it, and that once the baby was born, the name would just be his name, and we'd stop associating it with her ex. But I didn't believe that for a second, because she was literally choosing the name specifically because of her ex. So obviously the association would always be there. I asked her what she planned to tell our son when he asked why we named him Aaron, and she said she'd tell him he was named after a wonderful person who touched our lives. And I said, our lives, Lisa. He touched your life. I never even met the guy. And she said that didn't matter because he was part of her story and therefore part of our family's story. And I said, no, he's part of your story, and that's fine, but he doesn't need to be part of our son's story. We went round and round in circles, having the same argument in different ways. And I was getting more and more frustrated because Lisa genuinely could not seem to understand why this was such a big deal to me, and I felt like I was being completely gaslit into thinking I was the unreasonable one for not wanting to name my kid after her ex. Things got even worse when Lisa posted in some online parenting forum about the situation, framing it as, "My partner won't let me use a name that's meaningful to me," without mentioning that the meaningful name was her dead ex-boyfriend's name, and she showed me all these responses from people saying I was being controlling and that she should have equal say in the baby's name. I read through the forum post and comments and got really angry that she deliberately left out the most important context to get people on her side. And when I confronted her about it, she said she didn't think the Aaron backstory was relevant to the general question of whether both parents should have equal naming rights. And I said the backstory is literally the entire issue, Lisa. Nobody would be on your side if they knew you wanted to name our baby after your ex. She got defensive and said that wasn't true, and people would understand that honoring someone who died wasn't the same as being weird about an ex, and I told her to go back to the forum and add the full context and see how many people still supported her, and she refused, saying she didn't need to justify her feelings to strangers on the internet. At this point, we're 6 months into the pregnancy, and we still don't have a name picked out because Lisa refuses to seriously consider any other names, and I refuse to budge on Aaron, and it's creating this terrible tension between us that's affecting everything else in our relationship. We barely talk about the baby anymore because every conversation somehow circles back to the name argument, and I'm starting to worry about what's going to happen when the baby is actually born and we have to put a name on the birth certificate. Lisa has said multiple times that she's the one carrying the baby and going through pregnancy, so she should have final say on the name, and I've told her that's not how it works. Both parents get a say regardless of who carried the baby, and she's accused me of minimizing what she's going through physically. I've tried suggesting compromise names that start with A or have a similar sound to Aaron but aren't actually Aaron, and she's shot down every single one saying they don't have the same meaning, and I've said exactly, Lisa, they don't have the meaning of being named after your ex-boyfriend, which is precisely the point. Her family has continued to pressure me through various channels. Her dad called me to have a man-to-man talk about how important it is to keep Lisa happy during pregnancy, and maybe I should just let her have this one thing. And I told him that naming my son after his daughter's dead boyfriend wasn't one thing. It was a huge thing that would affect our family forever. My friends think I should stand my ground and not give in, and they've said that if Lisa is this unreasonable about the name issue, it's a red flag for other parenting decisions down the line, and honestly, I'm starting to worry about that too, because if we can't agree on something as fundamental as our child's name, how are we going to agree on anything else? Last week, Lisa suggested that maybe we could have 2 middle names and Aaron could be the second middle name so it would barely ever come up, and I said I appreciated her trying to compromise, but my answer was still no. And she broke down crying, saying she felt like she was losing Aaron all over again because I was trying to erase him from her life. I told her I wasn't trying to erase anyone, I just didn't want Aaron to be part of our son's name, and there were plenty of other ways she could honor his memory if that was important to her, like making a donation in his name or volunteering for a cause he cared about, or literally anything that didn't involve naming our baby after him. She said those things didn't feel personal enough, and having a child named Aaron would be a living tribute to him. And I said that's exactly the problem, Lisa. Our son shouldn't be a tribute to your ex-boyfriend. He should be his own person with his own name and identity. We're now at a complete standstill with less than 3 months until the baby is born, and I honestly don't know how we're going to resolve this, and I'm worried that this issue is revealing some deeper incompatibility between us that I didn't see before. So what do you think? Am I being unreasonable for refusing to name my son after my girlfriend's dead ex-boyfriend? Or is she completely out of line for even asking this? Let me know in the comments what you would do in this situation because I'm genuinely lost here. And if this story was as wild to you as it is to me, then definitely smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell for more relationship drama. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.